Bon dia, benvinguts i benvingudes a l'Esmorzar Finançament, organitzat per l'àrea de startups d'acció. L'esmorzar d'avui porta el títol Cap a on va el crowdfunding per a startups i l'hem escollit perquè des d'acció donem suport al finançament alternatiu ja des del 2014 i ens sembla interessant poder compartir les idees i conclusions en les que treballa l'European Crowdfunding Network i la gran tasca que estan fent pel crowdfunding a nivell europeu, com a via de finançament per a les startups. Aprofito que parlem de finançament alternatiu per anunciar que els dies 30 de novembre i 1 de desembre estem organitzant un acte de networking entre startups i inversors, on també estaran convidades les plataformes de crowdfunding dins de l'esdeveniment Tech Spirit Barcelona. En aquest acte, les startups podran mantenir reunions de 10 minuts prèviament agendades amb els inversors presents. En les properes setmanes facilitarem més informació sobre les dates en les que s'obrirà aquesta plataforma per demanar les reunions. Tornant a l'acte d'avui, l'esmorzar serà en anglès, en format ponència, i durant la sessió poden anar fent preguntes que la ponent contestarà al finalitzar la seva presentació. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Francesca Passeri, the Deputy Director at Eurocrowd. Francesca joined Eurocrowd in 2016, where she is responsible for advocacy and for strategic development. She holds a master's degree in international relations from the University of Bologna, where she focused on researching the potential of crowdfunding for regional development from an European perspective. Francesca is member of the executive board of Eurocrowd. Thank you, Francesca, for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rocio, for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here and to hear, although I don't speak Catalan, but to really try to understand and hear you say all these nice words about crowdfunding. And actually, we have been doing a lot of work with Eurocrowd, but I have to say that yourself and the organization that you represent has been working a lot on the ground. And this is indeed what we are encouraging and looking for in a partner. And so we're very, very happy that you're having this webinar to participate in it and also of your live event. So thank you for having us. I hope that this is going to be the most interesting sprint for the participants. You have introduced myself, so I will not take much more time. And I'll dive directly into this session for today. So the idea is today to discuss or provide some insights to startups, entrepreneurs, potentially also retail investor, institutional investors. I see that we have a number of participants, so I imagine that it will be very diverse an audience. So give them a glimpse in what crowdfunding can do and what is likely to become in the future as a way of financing your company, your projects, your ventures, and so on. So the idea today is more or less this one. I hope that you can see my presentation properly and my slides properly. Should it not be the case, please let me know. So I will, perfect. I will take a few minutes to introduce Eurocrowd to those that are not very familiar with what we do, so that I put also my intervention into context. And then I will just present which type of crowdfunding models we have out there, how is the market evolving, how it has evolved in the past years, so that we can have a first idea of how it will look like in the future, or at least that's our main theory or hypothesis or hope. And then we will dive deeper into equity, because equity crowdfunding has witnessed an increase, a growth in the recent years. It will grow even more so with the entry into force of the new European regulation, which will make each crowdfunding platform a truly European marketplace between companies that look for risk capital and potential investors. And then we will look at which type of investors are we going to be able to attract on a crowdfunding platform, and what do they look for in a company, what is the average investment, and of course this is, I think, most interesting for a company looking to raise funds for its sustainability. We will then talk about the interaction, talking about sustainability, about crowdfunding, and a number of different issues in terms of environmental, social governance, sustainability. And we will touch in the closing part on one of the issues that lays at the closest of the heart of startups, which is how do I protect my intellectual property rights when I use a financial mechanism that basically is telling me to go out there and to be as visible as I can. So how do I manage that when I have a breakthrough innovation or patent, And so we're going to touch upon that as well. And then I am hopefully flooded by questions that come from the audience, because I would really like to be able to answer any doubt. And so we will leave 15 minutes for questions that come from the audience, doubts, considerations, anything. So without taking too much time, we are the European Crowdfunding Network, which is a very long name. So we go by Eurocrowd for the sake of time. And we have a unique position. I have to say that we have the privilege of being the only network at the European level that represents the crowdfunding industry across the spectrum. So all models, all markets. We look to promote transparency, regulation and self-regulation, and good governance of the crowdfunding industry. We try as well to kind of build up the political discourse. So we try to build public opinion and knowledge and interest in the topic of crowdfunding, also by combining it with different sources of funding. So of course, we deal with crowdfunding as a core aspect of access to finance. But as Rocio was rightly saying in the introduction, I have been working with, for example, the structural funds. So those regional funds that come from the Commission, but that are managed at the regional level, and how to combine these public funds with crowdfunding, or how can we combine other types of alternative finance, like business angel funds or venture capital funds, with crowdfunding. Because the understanding that we have is that crowdfunding, as every other financial instrument, is but only a part of the funding pipeline, the funding mix that a startup or a company that wants to go ahead and look to sustainability in the long term has to take into account. So this is our core mission. We develop 4 pillars of activities, mainly. We're based in Brussels. We are industry network, so we represent an industry, and then this is we play the role of keeping an ongoing dialogue with EU institutions, but other fellow organizations as well. So our primary focus is on policy, but we also understand that we need to support those players that want to approach crowdfunding. So we also develop a number of advisory activities. And you cannot advise anyone if you don't do any education activity. So we advise and support, public authorities, private authorities, but we also we put a lot of effort into our education activities, such as in this case, for example, by participating in this webinar that I am most happy to be in. One last but not least pillar of activity that we have is the one on conduct. So we are striving to promote the best crowdfunding industry that we can. And this is why we have internally applied a code of conduct to all of our members that has higher quality professionalism requirements than what is required by minimum standards of applicable law. So anyone that wants to be our member, any platform, must comply with increased standards of professionalism, ethics, transparency, conduct. And this is, I think, the added value really that we can bring at the European level, and also what has enabled us to engage in this discussion with the policy authorities, with the European Commission, and what has led us to this new European regulation that I will talk to you about in 1 second. So this is enough about Eurocrowd. I think that has provided a good context for the talk that we're going to have today. But so diving right into the topic, what I want to discuss with you is really what is crowdfunding and what is the state of the art of crowdfunding. So how is it moving at the European level and also more specifically in the Spanish context? So we usually have 4 main models of crowdfunding. Now, I know that this is an event for startups, so I will not touch upon the 4th model that you will not see in this slide, which is donation crowdfunding, because that is more suitable to for not-for-profit causes or charity projects. So I don't think it's in the scope, and I took the liberty to exclude it from my presentation, but keep it in mind, it's there, it's strong. So it's just not the topic for today. So we have some common features that apply to all models. So these are that you see on the left side of the slide in blue. These are the things that apply to every crowdfunding model. And these are, for example, that crowdfunding is always a marketplace that matches an idea, a business, with funds. Funds that are coming from a large crowd of individuals, very diverse. We will go deeper into that in 1 second, and is potentially open to any individual that is over 18, so that is of age, and that has an access to the internet. Potentially open doesn't mean that is necessarily available or that your investors pool is that wide, but it means that is radically different from any other financing mechanism that you have on the landscape. So it's it provides much more opportunities to a company looking for funding, because potentially you have this large of a market if you can appeal to those people with your pitch. The other common feature is that there is always a limited time, a duration, a maximum duration through which you can raise funds for your idea. So you have a limited amount of time in which you have to strive to get to at least 100% of your target budget. At least doesn't necessarily mean that if you reach 100%, you cannot go higher. You can absolutely go higher and overfund, so raise more money than you have actually set out to. So you can go 110% funded, 120% funded. Depends on the models, of course. There are some limitations, but it is indeed an option. And then all crowdfunding models provide a combination of economic and non-economic benefits. So it's not only a way to raise finance, to raise capital, but it's also a way to integrate into your development or the development of the company a number of other benefits relating to, for example, marketing or client acquisition and retention, or the acquisition of smart money, for example. And here we have the 3 main models. So the first model that I want to discuss, and it will be the focus for today, is the equity model. So this model is subject to financial regulations. Up until now, there is a specific financial regulation in most member states. We are looking into having a, let's say, European regulation for equity and lending. And the equity model is truly perfect for startups because it allows them to raise capital for their idea and to appeal to a large crowd of investors. That can be retail, so individuals, as any one of us, but also professional investors. We are seeing an increase of professional investors increasing with the equity mechanism, like venture capital funds or business angels that are most of the times leading the crowdfunding round in equity. We then have the lending model, and the lending model is really structured like a loan. So you have a company that requires a specific amount of money, is willing to give it back to those investors or lenders that provide the funding within a specific amount of time. So let's say in 5 years, with a determined interest rate on the capital that they have lent. So it's really a loan mechanism, is just in this case disintermediated. So you're not asking money to the bank, you're asking money to the crowd. But we're seeing banks that are increasingly partnering up with lending crowdfunding platforms, and this is what we call institutional investors. So we're seeing that this model of course, is leading because it's leading the market. It's one of the strongest models that we can see in Europe since years. It has been stable. It has increased its cooperations with institutional investors across Europe. And of course, being a financial type of crowdfunding, it is subject to financial regulations as in the equity case. And as in the equity case, there were different regulations in different member states, but it will all come to, let's say, a more harmonized framework with the entry into force of the European regulation. And then the third model, I think it's really interesting for startups and SMEs, and it's often not considered as much because it's called reward crowdfunding. So you want to raise a determined amount of money, and in exchange for that money, you are willing to give to your supporters or your donors a perk, a gadget, but it can also be used for pre-sales. So if you have a product you want to launch on the market and you want to validate the market before going into the production phase, you can use reward crowdfunding to validate your market, build a first client base, and potentially raise the funding before you go into production. So I know this sometimes is not the first model that comes to mind when we think of crowdfunding for enterprises, startups, companies, whatever, but I would encourage everyone that has a new product, new service to launch to please consider this as well as an option. And then it might not be suitable, but shouldn't be, according to me, excluded right from the very beginning. It is not subject to financial regulation because there is no financial instrument, so there is no financial exchange, but it can be subject to commercial and VAT regulation, especially if we are looking at it as a pre-sales mechanism. It really falls into the commercial law. So these are the main models that I think are relevant for companies and SMEs. But then if we look at why is this instrument relevant, now that we know how it's divided into different models, I've reported here a few data that I hope will not bore you too much because I know it's 9:15 in the morning, but data is always useful to kind of set the scene. So here you have the same graph repeated twice. In the top page or in the top part of the slide, you see that the graph includes data from the UK. In the second half of the slide, so the bottom half, you see that data excludes the data from the UK. So why have we done this? We've done this because in the first place, we need to always keep in mind that the UK is not in the EU anymore, which means it's not subject to regulation for, such as the European regulation for crowdfunding service provider that will come into force next year, but also because the UK is the leading market for crowdfunding, representing over 70% of the total amount of funds transacted through crowdfunding. So what we needed to understand was, is this growth that we see here, constant and significant year on year, is this being led uniquely by the growth of the instrument in the UK, or is the growth of the instrument happening all over the European continent or all over the European Union? And so what you see here is that indeed we have basically the same situation when we look at data from the UK or with the UK, and when we look at data which exclude the UK. What does it mean for us? In the first place, well, of course, you can always argue that the absolute numbers are still small. This, bear in mind, refers to 2018 as a last year, because this is what Alternative Finance Center of Cambridge University has provided as consolidated data. So we don't have updated or updates that go beyond that, but it's still relevant. It's still relevant because we see that although the absolute numbers are relatively small if compared to other financing industries, we see that there is an increase in volume. And the increase in volume in crowdfunding translates into two main elements: an increase of confidence from companies that ask to use crowdfunding to raise their funds, and an increase of confidence from investors. So crowdfunding couldn't grow if one of these two parties would not trust the instrument. And how do you build trust? You build trust by proving that past experiences have worked. So we see that there is an increase in this trend, which is very positive, because it means that those that have run a crowdfunding campaign in the past are actually proving to perform well. And so this builds confidence in other companies that want to use the instrument and in other investors that are willing to provide this type of funding through the instrument. When we look at Spain, what do we have in Spain? We have a law, a specific law, that it's Law 5/2015 on promoting entrepreneurial funding, that is basically regulating equity crowdfunding. So what happens? It happens that crowdfunding platforms must register and obtain approval by CNMV, and only after this authorization is approved, they can operate. This is a way of protecting the investors and the companies that approach the crowdfunding platforms. And then the other things that this law, like the main elements that this law highlights, is the limit of 1 million euro for the amount that each company can raise over a period of 12 months. So you can only run a crowdfunding campaign up to 1 million euro. And the limit of 3,000 euro per investor per project. So you can only invest up to 3,000 euro per project. And then you need to basically change project or get a different type of way to fund this. This is quite limiting. It's limiting for companies and it's limiting for investors, especially if we have these regulations. If you think of the funding need that you have as a company, 1 million is really a low cap. This has been done, of course, in 2015, when the market was not so developed. So 1 million euro was more than enough, 3,000 euro was more than enough. And it was done so that the market, the companies, the investors could be as protected as possible. So we would avoid risk of high losses. The thing is, the market is now changed. There is a lot of requests from companies, as I was telling you, from investors. So when we look into the future, we need to kind of push this limit a little bit. And this is where the European regulation comes into play and is supporting the expansion of this instrument. And at the same time is supporting the expansion of companies in using this instrument, and also of investors in approaching it in a profitable way. And so what is this European regulation that I have been talking about since the beginning of this webinar? It's, I think, the main achievement of Eurocrowd up until this day. We have been working on this for 10 years. We were founded for this reason, so to bring a European regulatory framework into practice. And I have to say that we have achieved this, and that we have the European Crowdfunding Service Provider Regulation in force since October 2020. What does it mean that this regulation is in force? It means that it is possible indeed to apply for a European license from a crowdfunding platform, but there is a transition period that will last until November 2023. Transition period, it means you, as a platform, you can apply to get the authorization, but it's not compulsory. After November 2023, the 10th of November 2023, so little more than 1 year from now, it will be mandatory for all crowdfunding operators, if they want to keep on being crowdfunding platforms, so conducting their business, to obtain this European regulation. So this is indeed very good news for the crowdfunding industry, for the companies, and for investors, because it will open up a range of new opportunities that up so far were only thought of or dreamt of or hoped for. And now with this regulation, it's actually going to be possible. And the one very, very good news in all of this is that your national regulator, CNMU, has already issued the first license to platforms. It was the first member states, the first national regulator to enable licensing to crowdfunding platforms. And guess who was the first platform to ask and obtain the license? A UK platform, a non-European platform. So this has to tell us something, that it tells us something in the sense that we need to step it up. We need to play our part as a European crowdfunding industry, because this is a major opportunity. So if a platform that is operating in a market such as the English or the UK market, that is leading because it has 70% of transacted amounts, is asking for a European license to approach the European market, then it means that the European market has huge potential. And European platforms should do the same and are already working towards the same goal. We have other licensed platforms. But now this was very much focused on the platforms. With this regulation, what it means is that a crowdfunding platform with this license will be able to offer its services, which means offer its projects as investing opportunities in all 27 European member states. So up to now, if you went to a Spanish platform, they could only offer and market their projects, their investment opportunities to Spanish investors. With the European regulation, this is canceled. If the platform has a European license, and they will have to have one, your project, your idea can and will be marketed to all 27 member states, no restrictions. What does it mean for companies? It means that in the first place, you can approach a much larger pool of investors that come from all over the European Union. As a second point of interest for companies, that you remember the limit of 1 million euro per year that you could raise in the Spanish market. This is actually going to be increased to 5 million euro per year. That is quite significant, and it's going to apply to all of Europe. So we had other member states in which the limit was 8 million euro per year. It's going to be brought down, but this has been calculated as a viable average for companies and for the market to still develop and still be maintained under control. And it's quite a difference from the beginning. Another interesting point is that as a company, you will not only be able to approach Spanish platforms, but you will actually be able to approach any platform that is offering their services in Spain, which will be potentially every licensed platform in Europe. What does it mean for you? It means that with the same disclosure of information process, because it's going to be the same for everyone, it's going to be regulated at the European level, you can actually go and choose the platform that offers the best conditions to you in terms of management of your investors, in terms of fees and costs that you have to bear. So this is a huge opportunity for everyone. And then in turn, of course, this is a great opportunity for investors, because so I am Italian, based in Brussels. Doesn't matter that I am Italian. If I am based in Brussels with the current framework, I cannot invest in Italian companies if they run a campaign on Italian platforms. I can only invest in Belgian companies. Point is, I don't know the market here. I don't know Belgian economy or developments. I am not familiar with it. I don't have the confidence to invest. With the entry into force of the regulation, I, being based here, will be able to invest at home while being here. So there's so many opportunities that open up for investors. In terms of investor protection rules, this is going to be streamlined. So I will be guaranteed that the same investor protection rules apply to me when I invest in Spain, in Great Britain, or in Italy, or in Belgium. And of course, the tax incentives that are applicable in some countries will still remain applicable, because tax law, it's not a European law. So that will all remain as it stands at the moment. The last point is that this will become really a risk dilution mechanism. So you will be able to invest small amount of money, diversified across tens of projects coming from all over the EU. So you will be able to basically address or protect yourself from, let's say, market shocks that happen in one specific country or in one specific sector by diversifying your portfolio a lot. And this setup of an international set of rules will also incentivize professional and institutional investors in partnering with crowdfunding. So that is venture capital funds, business angels, banks, which will, of course, also increase the confidence of retail investors. So we think that this is a most welcome update that we will have and we will see, and we hope that everyone, platforms, companies, investors, everyone is preparing for this breakthrough in 1 year from now. If we look at equity, how does it work? So equity crowdfunding foresees a phase in which you have a pre-money evaluation of your startup. So how much your startup is worth before you do the crowdfunding round or the fundraising round. And then the company accepts to sell a percentage of the shares of their capital to crowd investors in exchange for what is called risk capital. So you can determine how much is the percentage of shares you want to give out. And that corresponds to how much money you want to raise according to your pre-money valuation. Of course, in this process, the ownership of the company is diluted and the capital is increased. In most cases, if the campaign fails, no money is lost by investors. If the campaign doesn't close, the money is returned to investors. If the campaign is successfully funded, so it reaches at least 100%, then the money will be transferred to the company and the campaign and the investors will become shareholders at all effects. So in this model, what are the main benefits for a company? In the first place, you have the opportunity to access finance in a very quick and more approachable way. You don't have to run a prospectus. You don't have to be listed on the stock exchange. You don't have to know personally venture capital funds or business angels. And as I was mentioning before, you can adapt or adopt this mechanism as a democratization of the investment opportunities that are being offered. So you're basically opening up in a more participatory and democratic way your capital to potential shareholders. Of course, in this process, you have an enlargement of your cap table. So you have more shareholders, which in some cases is seen as a no-go for a lot of investors. But you have to think that in most cases, the type of investor that you attract are also linked to specific networks. They have a specific knowledge on the topic, on the field, on the sector. They want to support the company in doing well. So you're attracting what is so-called the smart money. And this is possible through equity because it's actually a disintermediated process. So as an investor, you really have to assess whether you can understand what the company is going to do and whether you feel up to the task of investing in it. And then another benefit, as I was telling you, is really not so much an economic one, but a non-economic one. It means that while you're running your equity crowdfunding campaign, you're also running a marketing exercise. You are actually positioning your business onto your market and you're validating that famous business plan that is always required of you. By doing all of this, you are positioning yourself not only in the current round, but also in perspective of future and further rounds for the investment of capital. So you have to think of crowdfunding not as a, let's say, a punctual exercise, but as one thing that allows you to build a pipeline of investment and business opportunities. There are, of course, obstacles that is mainly related to the lack of liquidity for investors. So once you invest in equity in a company, you have no secondary market, or very rarely you have a secondary market. Very difficult to trade shares. So once you buy shares into a company, you basically marry into the company. It's very difficult to get out. The other thing, it's not related to equity crowdfunding per se, but to the startup markets. There's a high failure rate, so that you have to take into account. You will encounter resistance from investors. They will ask every piece of information that you can imagine from you. And if the campaign is badly managed, or if the company doesn't perform after it is funded through equity, you have reputational negative backlashes that are very strong, because you've opened up to a large crowd of investors. So you have to be really careful that you can deliver on what you promise, that if you promise growth, then you can deliver growth. Otherwise, you will have a very, very strong backlash. And then you can take the 5 million euro limit as an improvement, but we have to take into account that it still remains a limitation, because if you think of startups that move, for example, in the health or med tech departments, 5 million euro for them is very, very low. So this is always to be kept in mind. This is basically a summary of what I've told you. What does crowdfunding do for you? Shorter time to raise capital. Crowdfunding rounds can last between a couple of hours and a couple of weeks. Amounts and conditions can be negotiated. You decide, how much you want to raise and which type of rights you want to give out. Not everyone that invests in your company will actually be able to vote and have a say in the decision-making process. So the cap table is not going to be huge, but it can remain manageable. And it represents a risk dilution mechanism of the most effective that we now have on the financial landscape. And then for the non-economic benefits, you have, as I said, positioning and market validation for your idea, visibility and marketing exercise while you run your fundraising, so not after that. You have an increased number of shareholders, which means more smart money, and potentially an expansion of your client base. What are the investor types that you can find in a crowdfunding platform? So you have two types of investors: the retail investors and the professional investors. In the retail investor, you have one-shot investors. So they know you, they know your company, they will come to you, invest in your company, and that's it. And then you have the serial investors. These are the people that look at equity crowdfunding as really an alternative way of kind of diversifying their return on their capital, and will invest in a number of companies. In the professional investor landscape, we have alternative investors and institutional investors. In the institutional investors, we have banks. That's mainly the type of investor that we can find. In the alternative investor scene, we find business angels, we find venture capital funds, we find special purpose vehicle from investment funds, we find private equity players. So all of this you can actually find on a crowdfunding platform. So when you think of crowdfunding and you think just that, your cousin, your friend of a friend will give you 1,000 or 2,000 euro, please reconsider. Because when you go and do the analysis on the rounds that have been happening in the past, 5 years, this is more likely the situation that you will look at if you go and do the breakdown of investors, which of course also link to different ranges of investments. So here, when we have to look at crowdfunding, what are the main sectors in which crowdfunding is working and pushing as a financial mechanism? We have to say that in the first place, and this is specifically found from kind of running a recognition on the Catalan ecosystem. We have a lot of technology startups or medical technology startups. We have strong medtech industry, digital and social ventures that raise capital through crowdfunding, energy efficiency and renewable energy type of companies, and cultural and creative industries. So these are the four main sectors that we see as driving the crowdfunding sector from the company side. And then when we look at the investor kind of breakdown, and this is not super accurate, this is an estimate from desk research, so take it with caution, but we can quite safely say that retail investors tend to invest between 500 euro and 1,000 euro per deal. Also, if you think of the limit, it makes sense. If you have a 3,000 euro limit per project, you don't want to go and max it out. So it's in line with, you know, what is considered to be reasonably safe by the national regulator. So this is the average that we found. For professional investors, we find that they can, or they usually invest around 5 to 10% of the overall amount to be raised. So we don't have a specific amount here or an average amount, but we can kind of see and perceive that it's an investment that covers 5 to 10% of the total crowdfunding round. From the company side, what is the average raise? We range from 30,000 euro to 1.5 million euro at different stages. And the average equity that is being sold in exchange for this capital raise ranges between 15 and 20%. So this is more or less the breakdown of the Spanish ecosystem, the Catalan ecosystem at the moment. Of course, this will change very, very much if we have the same conversation in 2 years, because the regulation is going to change a number of elements. So this was more or less the overview on crowdfunding as an instrument for companies, for investors per se, the regulation. So this was the more technical, detailed part. Now we're going to tackle two topics. One is crowdfunding and sustainability, and one is intellectual property rights and crowdfunding. So I'm about to finish. Please bear with me for 5-10 more minutes, and then we open up to questions. So we start from sustainability. So how can crowdfunding incentivize sustainable business practices? We have seen that, you know, in this framework or in the current situations that we have, investors are increasingly demanding to know where their money is going. What am I investing in? They're not happy with the usual investment product that is a bit blurry, and the only information they get out of there is how much money can I make in return. They really want to know, what am I investing in? And they have clear preferences towards sustainable and impactful companies. This doesn't mean that, you know, they only will invest in renewable energies or tech for good type of companies. They just want to know that the companies that they're investing in have in mind sustainability as a dimension that is equally important as profitability. So what happens? This is the investor demand. From companies, we know that we have a 98% of the European economy made up of startups and SMEs, micro SMEs, whatever. But for all of these companies, there has not been, we don't have a reference framework. There is not a standardized way to demonstrate which type of sustainability and impact measures they have undertaken or in which they're working to their investors. So these companies have to come up either with their own requirements, or they have to refer to 1,000 different frameworks. You know, you approach a specific investor and you're asked for some requirements. Then you go to a bank, you're asked for different requirements. So it's very fragmented, although these companies are really the backbone of the economy. And then we have crowdfunding platforms. And crowdfunding platforms have started working already in how to measure and report and monitor impact and sustainability together with companies, but each one of them has their own reporting framework, their own reporting standards. But so this is, again, an increased fragmentation. Of course, there are similarities because we're all going to measure the same things, but it's not the similarities that we're interested in. It's the detail that makes the business owner or the startupper go mad because it's so kind of different. And so you feel like you're doing the work 1,000 different times. And then it becomes really also difficult to track it, monitor it, and report it. Can you go to a business angel with the same sustainability and impact criteria that you have fulfilled for a crowdfunding platform? Probably not. They will probably not care. They will give you a different framework and they will assess you against that different framework. We have one good thing out of all of this, and is that at least crowdfunding platforms are really working for smaller, younger companies. So you will not have the rigid frameworks that you will have for bigger companies. It will likely be more suitable to you. And we are working with these platforms as well. So we're trying to kind of create something that makes sense, not only among the crowdfunding industry, but also when a company will approach some other type of investor afterwards. So this is the type of synergy that we're trying to create in the sustainability framework. It's a tough job. We have to fight a number of different issues, but we are working on it. And we hope to have good results, at least preliminary results from this very, very soon. And then we discuss a second issue, and it's my last point for today. And that's, how do I protect my intellectual property when I use crowdfunding, which is the anti-protection mechanism, because you're supposed to be all out there. So what are the main concerns that we receive from companies when we tell them about crowdfunding? These are, the most common questions that I've received, and it's, how do I go public if my idea is unique? It has to stay unique. I want to keep it my own, and it has to have that surprise effect. Or how can I make sure that once I go out there, my idea doesn't get copied, doesn't get stolen? Is crowdfunding safe against competitors? Which means not only that they can see my idea and copy it out, but how do I know that my investor is actually not my competitor and gets access to my full kind of development lines, my pitch deck, my everything, by investing a stupid amount of money, like 200 euros? How can I protect my idea in this huge thing that is the wild, wild web, not the West anymore? And how do I attract investors without disclosing too much info? Because one of the attitudes that we see is, okay, I will just put very little information on my crowdfunding campaign. But that doesn't work so much for investors, because they really want to know what they're putting their money into. So what is the main solution? For the moment, the main solution is to go to this website. It's called Ideas Powered for Business. It's developed by the European Union Intellectual Property Office. And basically there we have partnered with them to try and figure out ways through which entrepreneurs can protect their idea, even if they want to use crowdfunding. So there is a very short discovery guide. It's the one that I have linked here. It's the first in the page. You go there, you take a quick screen, and you kind of realize if crowdfunding is suitable for you, what you can protect, how you can protect it. And then the second concern that I usually get is, but it is so expensive to protect my intellectual property that I really don't want to do it. It's not worth it, but I need it. So how do you do this? You actually go to the EUIPO website, which is this European Union Intellectual Property Office. It's based in Alicante, so they're also quite close to you. And basically what they work on is making sure that trademarks, designs are covered, are protected. They also work with national IP offices in every member states. And basically what they want to do is support you in protecting your IPR as much as possible. So I also left you the link here. Last point, most services are for free. Those that are not for free can be covered by a specific fund that they have. So for example, they have the SME fund. It's a grant scheme that is designed to help small and medium-sized enterprise, but in the practice, if you're a startup, you can still apply. You can apply until December 2022, so you have time if you want to protect your idea, your trademark, your design. And I think it covers up to 2,250 euro per application. So that should be, a significant amount. And most of the times companies manage to protect their IP in that way. Then if you don't know what you can protect, they still have another service online for free. And it's understand your IP, identify which assets you have that can be protected as your intellectual property. And then when you have identified those, you can actually access a new service that is free IP support. So you want to basically engage for dispute resolution, you want to ask a question to a lawyer for IP matters, you want to get help to prepare your IP application, they have a network. The service is called Free IP Support. So it's free and it's specifically tailored on supporting you. It's a network of lawyers. It's out there. Last service, IP Scan. You go there, you do your scanning, you learn how to incorporate an intellectual property strategy into your company's business plan. One last tip is companies that have IP protected in crowdfunding campaigns, they tend to perform much better. So this is basically all I wanted to tell you about crowdfunding. I hope it was sufficiently clear. If not, I think now is the time for questions. So please feel free. I am absolutely at your disposal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Francesca, for this great presentation about crowdfunding. And now it's time for questions. We have 12 questions by now, and we will try to answer them all briefly. I will start reading them to you. And okay, let's start with that.
Okay.
With regards to the crowdfunding volume graph, the chart is up to 2018. What has happened afterwards in the EU?
Right. Okay. So what we have seen and what I can tell you, let's say informally, in the sense that we don't have data, as I said, is that the market has continued growing. It has continued growing in spite of the COVID pandemic. We thought there was going to be a harsh break when we had the stop because of the lockdowns in Europe. So that was mid-2020 to mid-2021. It hasn't happened. What we have seen is that there has been much more interaction in that case between institutional investors, so banks, for example, government funds, and crowdfunding platforms, because crowdfunding was one of the quickest way to get money out there to the companies and to the real economy. So we were expecting a decrease in volumes and markets. It hasn't happened. It was actually a steady trend that has kept the previous trend. So it has kept on growing and it has not slowed down as we were expecting. So we were positively surprised.
Okay. Joanna Rodriguez asks, it's possible to access to crowdfunding equity if I'm a freelancer?
No, sorry, that's a harsh no, because you must have a company, because you must be able to perform a capital raise. So that's a proper legal act. So you have to have capital.
Yes. Okay, Lorena Jurado says, hi, the pre-money valuation is provided by the startup. Is it assessed, corrected by some externals? Thank you.
The pre-money evaluation depends on the platform. Sometimes they want to run their own. Sometimes if you have your own pre-money done by an external advisory firm, they accept it. It has to make sense. So even if, you can dispute it, you can negotiate it, but you cannot have huge pre-money evaluation for a business that is basically making coffee cups. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that rhythm. Lydia Navarro is a question that could lead for another session. How the crowd investors will appear in the cap table, as one entity or as several individuals?
Okay, so very quickly, this is also defined by the structure of the deal. So usually you can have a lead investor that then represents the whole crowdfunding investor, let's say, percentage at the cap table. And at that point, you have one person representing the whole, let's say, investor pool that amounts for that specific percentage. In other cases, you have different types of rights associated to different types of investments. So let's say you have an investment that is a minimum of 500 euro, and up to 2,000 euro, you only get, let's say, the basic rights. So you get potentially your money back if it's sold or a profit, but you have no voting rights. Above a threshold, let's say above 2,000 or 10,000 euro, those that invest above that threshold, they can have voting rights. So, it depends really on how you structure the deal, but Rocio is right. We should have a separate session, and I'm happy to do it with you.
Okay, thank you. Cinta Lacasta, sorry. In the new regulation, will there be a cap to individual investment, now 3,000 euros in Spain?
So this is still being discussed in the sense that the discussion is, yes, we should have, let's say, measures to kind of protect investors from themselves. But in the MiFID questionnaire that is applicable to all, let's say, financial instruments that you have to take, there's already a disclaimer, that you shouldn't invest more than 10% of your liquid assets and so on and so forth. Then, you have free will. So the discussion is, why do we put a cap? I mean, if one person wants to invest 4,000 instead of 3,000, does it make sense to cap them at that? So it's an ongoing discussion. We don't have specifics yet, but these are the two, let's say, lines of thought. We hope there won't be a cap.
Okay, Brian proposed a short one. Does it apply for seed capital?
Wait, say again. What applies for seed?
I suppose it refers to crowdfunding. Does it apply for seed capital?
Yes, Brian. Yes, absolutely. It does.
Carlos Nebot, great presentation, Francesca. Thank you. Do you need a certified platform to raise funds via crowdfunding, or the company could do it on its own, assuming you meet certain criteria? I say that because most of the platforms available in Europe charge a high percentage of fees, which makes the process expensive.
Carlos, you are right. That is why I was mentioning that now, with the competition increasing and you being able to go to different platforms, maybe this situation, or necessarily, it will get better, but no, do not raise the funds on your own. In the first place, you basically cannot have an offer to the public if you are not regulated, because you're basically illegal. So yes, if you go to a crowdfunding platform and you want to go to you want to appeal people that you don't know, go to a platform that is definitely registered and that you can kind of see on the public registry of the CNMV. If you want to raise the money on your own, you have to do it offline in bilateral meetings or in a sort of a club deal, but that's much more, time consuming and everything. So you have to kind of do the balance, what is more worth to you. But I agree, high fees, it's a bummer.
Okay, next question. We have 1 minute, but we will stay like some more minutes. Frederick Pierre, with the enlargement of the cap table, are the new shareholders from the crowdfunding syndicated in any way? That's related with the
that is the same answer that I've given before. So it depends on how you structure your deal. There's not necessarily an indication if you want to syndicate them. That is up to you and how you want to offer this. Some investors might find it more appealing because they say, okay, then I am represented. Some investors might even find it more burdensome because they really don't want to have the voting rights. They just want to invest the capital. So up to you.
Okay, Daniel Codina comments about the limit for companies about 5 million euros. He says that he understood that the last year this minimum was raised to 8 million. I don't know if there is something about that.
Oh, in the European regulation, we're still stuck at 5 million. Sorry, Daniel. 8 million threshold was a discussion because as an Italian, Italy has pushed for that. Didn't get it.
Okay. Aníbal Carmona, does the EU have in mind a portal where all the approved platforms are together with data on their performance in the success of their campaigns? That's interesting.
Yeah, that is a super good question. And yes, the EU is going to be developing that portal, and it's going to be managed by ESMA, European Securities Market Authority. So there is going to be, and the platforms will be forced to report their performance each year. So that is going to be applied.
Okay, Aníbal asks again, in the sectors that you name it, you did not mention real estate. The regulation will allow this type of portals. Today they work as loans with mortgage guarantee.
Yeah, no, the regulation doesn't exclude any sector. It just regulates the sectors that have to do with startups and SMEs and the models of equity and lending. So if I have excluded real estate because it's really focused on buildings, properties, assets, like physical assets. If you are a company, for example, that work in the construction department and you want to raise your capital, you cannot go to a real estate platform. You have to go to a regular equity platform because the real estate platform will say, oh, but you're not a building. I'm not structured this way. So that's why I have excluded it, like the donation, because it wasn't really in the scope. But the regulation doesn't forbid anything to happen. It doesn't exclude platforms to keep operating in their model. But real estate platforms have their fundraising rounds for companies. So they will be subject to the regulation because it will be a company raising funds for their development project. So it will be subject to the regulation. It will still exist, and it's one of the leading sectors in every EU member state.
Okay, Arnau asks a question about the launching a crowdfunding campaign through itself, that the startup by their own, so it's answered already.
Sorry, Arnau.
Aníbal, again, you said that the limit for companies will be 5 million. My question is about the limit for investors. Will it continue at 3,000 or there will be no limits for qualified investors?
For qualified investors, I think that there has never been a limit, because if you're a qualified investor, it's basically your job. Yeah, you fulfill some requirements that you really understand the topic and you're willing to accept the risk that come with your investment. So for qualified investors, I don't think there's ever been a limit. I have not heard of a mention of it in the new regulation. I think that the point was more for retail investors, so for people that are not professionals in the investment industry. So, and the answer is as above.
Okay, Mireia asked when this new European regulation is going to start?
10 November 2023.
Okay. Carlos Ibarlucea says, congrats, very clear presentation. Francesca, the question is, how can be the how can be the control of the company maintained? I mean, can be the funds returned to investors in some moment before giving them company stocks?
Can the money be returned to investors before?
In some moment before giving them?
Yeah, you can rebuy the shares from investors, but not before you give them the stocks. So if the crowdfunding campaign, the round closes, you have investors, you know. And if you want to repurchase that type of stock, the percentage of stocks that you have sold of shares, you have to repurchase them at the new price, which includes also the updated pre-money evaluation after the crowdfunding round, so that they have, you know, a slight benefit or profit from the investment that they have made. So at that point, you really have to assess whether it's worth doing a crowdfunding round or not if you want to rebuy it right away. But of course, there has been stories of companies that have repurchased the crowdfunding shares after 3-4 years, and investors were delighted, you know.
Okay, the two last questions. Thank you, Francesca, for that.
No worries.
Considereth asks, thanks a lot, Francesca, very clear and nice presentation. My question is, what is the cost of organizing a crowdfunding, and what is the percentage of achievement to conclude that a campaign is a success? It's 100%?
Yes, 100%. It means that you've succeeded. Your campaign is fully funded. If you ask me about the success rate, so how many campaigns basically are successfully funded out of all of those that have been presented, it's quite high. I don't have a specific number, but I would guess we're in the realm of 90-95%. Why is it so high? Because there is a strong due diligence performed by the platforms. So the platform will look at your business and make sure that you're absolutely excellent, because they have responsibility towards investors. So if they put up projects or companies that then don't perform, they have a negative reputation, because investors will say, haven't you been doing your job? You're supposed to assess the investment opportunities that I encounter on your portal. So that's basically how it works. And then I forgot, I think, the first part of the question.
It was the cost.
The cost. That really depends on the type of platform that you choose. Some of them have a flat fee. It can be a couple of €1,000 so that they can run all the checks and the screening on your project. Then you go online and they keep a percentage, but only if you get successfully funded. And that is the most common structure. So I would say for the platform, you have to keep into account that upfront you will have a couple of €1,000 to invest in the platform, but then also consider if you need marketing, if you need this pre-money evaluation to be performed, if you have support in structuring your business plan, you know, all these type of things. I don't know, maybe Axio as a public agency has services that will help you for free. So if they have, please use them. So because that's all saved money. Otherwise you have to do it, you know, paying them. So that's more or less the answer.
And the last one, an interesting one proposed by Pedro Sandoval. Have Eurocrowd considered using DTL, blockchain, and Web3 as infrastructure for future of crowdfunding and not through centralized companies?
Pedro, I wish that we could work together on this. Yes, we have been studying indeed the topic of DLTs, blockchain, decentralized kind of nodes that we could use or that platforms could use to underpin their transactions. Someone has really also went so far as to try to accept transactions in crypto. You know, it's really complicated at the moment. It's a really exciting topic. I think we will be looking at it. Of course, you'll be the first one to know if we find something. If you have any idea, please let us know. We're always happy to explore things. But for the moment, you know, it's just an exploration exercise. Interesting, but there is also the MiCA regulation, which is how do we regulate crypto assets? And so that interferes too much. If some platforms wanted to use DLT to underpin the transactions, maybe they could be able to do it, but it's not been applied yet. But it's a super interesting thing.
Okay, so we have done with all the questions and we have to conclude the session. Thank you, Francesca, and all the attendees. Thank you very much.